Hi folks, today I wanted to really try and get under the skin of the rental market and chat to somebody who is familiar with the goings on, because it is a very important market and I know lots of Move IQ audience have been asking about it, so here we are. I'm really pleased to be joined by Mark Hayward, who is policy advisor at the industry body Propertymark. Mark, good to see you again. Thank you. Always grateful for your time and your input on these matters, delicate matters, but important matters. Can we just kind of start talking broadly about the rental market and how things are? How are your members seeing things? How's it looking out there?
Well, a bit like the sales market, the rental market is very buoyant at the moment. We are seeing outside London rent rises of between 4 and 5% over the last year, and we are seeing a chronic lack of supply. So there is huge demand still, but the supply does not meet that demand. So there's probably 20 tenants for every property out there at the moment.
My goodness me. So yeah, supply and demand, prices rise. I wonder why isn't there supply? Is that because buy-to-let landlords, well, they're not buying anything?
I think they have been buying. I think they have been concerned about the taxation issues around being a private landlord. I think latterly they've been concerned about the possibility of corporation tax and other indicators that there may be a tax on property wealth in general. So they've been cautious, but the market relies predominantly upon private landlords. Well, entirely really from the PRS.
So that's a very difficult position for tenants and prospective tenants when it's hard to buy, it's hard to get a mortgage to do that, it's hard to save up a deposit, but actually rents are rising on top of that, which and kind of cost of living is rising. So that's a difficult predicament. Do you have any advice for people that find themselves stuck in that kind of cycle of renting?
It is difficult. I mean, we've conducted some research that says that first-time buyers will have spent anything between £50,000 and £80,000 in rent before they're in a position to buy. We know that pre-pandemic, the loan-to-value was relatively favourable in terms of first-time buyers, but we know since the pandemic, the number of products available has reduced. Even if they are out there, they're in a higher interest level. We know that wage inflation is low, so the ability to save is difficult. And if you're a single person, it's even more difficult in terms of getting on the property ladder. So I don't think there's a quick, easy fix there. The government is in favour very much of home ownership, and that's why it has penalised, I think, private landlords of late. But the Help to Buy scheme only applies to first-time buyers. That's coming to an end. It's being revised. So the government needs to do something to encourage and help people get on the housing ladder. But it's a difficult one. The Bank of Mum and Dad may be overdrawn at the moment, may still be there. And in fact, the Bank of Mum and Dad is the biggest bank lending to first-time buyers.
Is that right? Is that right? I read at the weekend it was the 10th biggest lender of all, but
correct.
The biggest lender to first-time buyers.
The only difference is when you come from the Bank of Mum and Dad, never normally gets repaid.
You said that with feeling, Mark.
I do, yes.
I know you've got great contacts within the government. So, I mean, I take it that Propertymark and yourselves are doing everything they can to encourage government to help first-time buyers.
I think we are there to help first-time buyers, but we're there to help tenants and landlords just as much as first-time buyers.
Okay.
But you know, the issue that we've got at the moment, we have a generation of renters that's getting older and older.
Do you think that'll change?
It's going to be very difficult to change if people haven't got the ability to get a mortgage. We know we've got that sort of cloud hanging over us of the withdrawal of the furlough scheme. A lot of tenants may well be in sectors that have seen unemployment closures, like the hospitality sector, the travel industry. So we might find down the line things are going to be particularly difficult for renters.
Can we just kind of play that tape forward for a minute? So first-time buyers are getting older. and there is less supply of rental property and rents are rising. So let's play that tape forward, because I think the government have deliberately made buy-to-let investing less attractive, less financially attractive by changing the tax rules, as you indicated. And they did that because they felt that a lot of investors were buying up properties that would normally have been bought by first-time buyers. So they wanted that to kind of ease away. But in so doing, of course, in my mind, they have reduced the numbers of properties to rent, which is pushing prices up. Fast forward now, what's going to happen? Because they've been successful in that. Buy-to-let is not as financially attractive as it once was, but there are more people wanting to rent properties. So that would say to me that rents are going to rise even further.
I think they will, but rents are normally constrained by affordability. There is a limit to which rents will rise. And we know, we've seen over the last few months, rents in central London have dropped phenomenally for the whole reason about the pandemic and living close to one another. And they've dropped by about 15%. So you've got to do something about supply. So you either encourage the private landlord, or you make big inroads into the build to rent sector.
Yes.
But I suppose some of the issues with build to rent is that those who are building to rent are building a premium product for which they want a premium rent, rather than build to rent affordable. And I think that's something that the government needs to look at, how they can incentivize people to do that. And it will have to be a cash injection, because we know that developers, investors want a return. So the outlay has got to be reduced.
But it's a market that interests me, the whole build to rent. But of course, one of the things that they sell that on is convenience and the concierge and the whole package. Doing that on an affordable basis, I guess, would get a bit difficult. Anyway, it's one to watch.
Yeah.
Mark, could we just discuss the Renters Reform Bill? I don't know too much about this, but I do know that it's been delayed. What are your thoughts on it?
It has been delayed, and it's been delayed predominantly by the pandemic, and I think Brexit as well. The indications that we're getting from government is that it will happen, but it's not going to happen imminently. I suspect the latter half of this year, if it is going to happen. But I know that they're committed to reviewing anything like this that they're possibly committed to prior to the pandemic, reviewing it in a post-pandemic environment.
Can you just outline for our audience what it involves, the reform bill? What kind of topics are they discussing?
Predominantly, it's the abolition of Section 21, which is the view is that if they did this, evictions, vicarious evictions would cease, and tenants would have better security of tenure. We're again working with the government on this, because like all government initiatives, there may be unexpected consequences. Again, it may discourage private landlords even more if they feel there's greater security for their tenants than for the landlord. There's a section called Section 8, which, if that could be improved, may find a way out. But I would, yes, caution tenants and landlords that we haven't got the detail yet.
Okay.
The government is still talking about it, but there's nothing firm as.
It's a very kind of fine line, isn't it? Because there are two sides to it. You've got to protect tenants. You also got to protect landlords. You don't want tenants being kicked out and onto the street and therefore causing themselves a problem, and actually us as taxpayers and the state a problem. But landlords have mortgages to pay and debts, and you don't want to cause them a problem either. So yeah.
No, it's difficult, particularly as landlords have recently experienced lack of rent payments, lower rent payments, and they've got, as you said, they've got to deal with lenders in the majority of instances as well.
Any advice from you on actually dealing and for either landlords or tenants who find that they're in arrears? Any advice of how to work through that?
Advice is speak to one another, or speak to, if it's a managing agent, speak to them. most landlords would prefer to have some rent coming in than no
Yeah.
rent coming in. There are arrangements that you can make as a tenant with the landlord. Landlord's a big scary word, but actually most of them are small landlords. They're human, and they'd rather have somebody paying steady rent than no rent, as I said. So it's about communication.
It is. I'm glad. I'm glad you said that. But it is such a kind of human reaction if you're in trouble to stick your head in the sand and think it's going to go away. But actually, that's the last thing you need to do. You need to get on the front foot and talk to people and say, "Look, I'm fine now, but I'm worried I might get into trouble. We need to have a conversation," and then everybody can plan and be open and, as you say, communicate with one another.
I think meanwhile, the tenant look after the property.
Yeah, yeah. Can we talk about lifelong deposits? Because a deposit is a major expense for someone looking to take on a rental property, and can they roll that forward? I know lifelong deposits is something that's being looked at.
It's being looked at the moment in terms of the fact that as a tenant, when you move tenancies, you have to provide another deposit or evidence of that deposit before the deposit in the current property that you're living in is surrendered. So they're trying to obviate the need to, in effect, have two deposits out there in the system. How that can be applied, is that going to be a short-term loan? Is that going to be registered via open banking? But they are quite a way down the line in providing this lifetime deposit, which would help tenants immensely. It won't affect the landlords, but it would affect and help to move.
It's got to be a good thing, hasn't it? And the quicker it arrives and is sort of up and running, I think the better. Open banking. I mean, that's I hadn't even heard of that term a year ago, but I think it's great to see.
Yeah, no, it's
again, a slightly delicate one at the moment. Students, a lot of students. I mean, they're having the toughest of all times, but a lot of students are renting in the private sector. I just really feel for them. Is that something that your members are having to deal with?
Certainly in university towns and areas there. Traditionally, at this time of year, students would be piling into or signing agreements on accommodation for next September, come out of halls. I think students need to be careful as to what agreement they sign and how that is dealt with. So read the small print. It is difficult. It does mean that I suppose the demand has slackened a bit.
Yes.
Particularly where in terms of overseas tenants. Students where certain areas would see a huge predominance of people coming in. So there might be an opportunity to get a property to rent at a slightly lower figure.
Okay.
And again, students tend to share. Careful about who you share with. I don't mean in any way. Because you are jointly and severally responsible. So if you're in a house, make sure that the people have the ability to actually take occupation and will take occupation.
Yeah. And finally, if I may, this perhaps a little bit left field, so forgive me for it, but something that intrigues me is the idea of longer term tenancies. And in the UK, we are very used to the 12-month assured short hold tenancy, and everyone does it and no one thinks much more about it. But why can't and why don't we have a 5-year tenancy, a 10-year tenancy? I'm sure they do all over the continent. How come we don't see them here, and why not?
Well, we don't see them over here. The average tenancy, I think, is 23 months at the moment, which sounds ridiculous. Whether you have to move every 12 to 24 months. We know it works extraordinarily well in places like Germany, Spain, for instance, where rents are controlled there, but the tenant, with the security of tenure, will invest in the property that they're renting. They'll put new kitchens in, they'll decorate it. Over here, there's that concern, I'll be stuck with that tenant. But I think landlords need to take a broader view. Majority, if they're using a mortgage, that's a long-term loan. So a long-term tenant, and if they're a good one, I think it's something to be encouraged.
I'm pleased you said that, because it seems to me, and perhaps coming through all that we've been through in the world over the last 12 months. People are more community minded now than they ever have been. And when you're looking for a rental home, you're looking for a home. You know, you're going to bring up your children. You're going to get to know your neighbours. You're going to use the local school. You're going to shop in the local shop. It's just as important. And if you've got security of tenure with a 5 or 10 year lease, then you're going to embed into the community. And as you say, chances are you'll put a new kitchen in and you'll feel properly established. So it's, in my book, it's got to be a good thing. But I just wonder why we haven't seen those yet. Who doesn't want them? Is it the landlords?
Partly in terms of the landlord, I think I will get stuck with somebody. But if you talk to landlords, I think if they're a long-term landlord, they'd be much happy to say, I've got a 10-year tenancy, I've got guaranteed income for 10 years. That gives me security. But I suppose, the psyche of landlords. Tenants, are they scared about making a long-term commitment? There's a possibility of that.
Yeah.
But if you had the opportunity of making it your family home
Yeah.
for a long period of time, that would encourage you. You wouldn't be so concerned about buying at that point. But ultimately, at some point you would. But you may be able to roll that forward and forward. So you might find we have a generation of people who rent for their entire life.
Yeah. As they do on the continent. I mean, what's wrong with that? It's a perfectly valid choice. And just thinking forward, maybe it's a choice that people are going to be more comfortable making. But we have to have the environment. We have to have the leases to enable that. But I'm heartened that you would support the idea. Maybe you could have a word to your government friends.
I'll do that tomorrow, Phil.
Really appreciate it, Mark. So long and short of it is, the rental market is buoyant and busy. Actually, rents are rising outside of London. They're rising quite quickly, and that is due to a lack of supply and a heightened demand. So if you're renting, you need to have your wits about you and get on with it sharpish.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. Great to see you, as always. Hugely appreciated your wise words. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you, Bill.